58 days and $47,000 burned on ads. That's how much it cost us to recover from a single SKU stockout early last year. Going out of stock on Amazon doesn't just cost you lost sales, lost rank, lost ad efficiency, lost subscribers, and the worst part, it all goes to your biggest competitor. The lost sale is the smallest piece. I'm Jasim, Eisa, CEO and founder of Voadera. We've sold hundreds of millions of dollars on online marketplaces like Amazon. Last year, we managed 21,000 SKUs and $41 million worth of inventory, averaging 98.7% in stock. In this video, I'll share the exact 5-step process we use, plus the one mistake almost every brand makes, costing them 6 figures. The first and most underrated step is alignment between the demand planning and the marketing team. Getting your demand planning or inventory management team and marketing team in the same room aligned is one of the most crucial parts for accurate inventory forecasting, to not be understocked or overstocked. A lot of brands, especially smaller brands, this could be the same person doing both functions, but usually it's different departments, right? And the reason that alignment is so important is that demand planning, a lot of it is based on historical data. For example, they look at last year's performance for that period, the last few months, and order accordingly. But let's say, for example, last year, a 30% Prime Day deal was ran, but this year you're only planning to do 15% for Prime Day, right? That impact is going to have on how much inventory is sold. So if you just look at last year's inventory requirements, you're going to end up overstocked. Another example is, let's say for last year, you were running a meta ads, and this year you moved that budget to Google. That may be what became better or worse. The inventory team has to understand that. So getting both teams on the same page is one of the most important steps for accurate inventory, to not be overstocked or understocked. The way we do this is we did a few things. First of all, we got them both on the same source of truth. So we have an overall dashboard that has inventory that both marketing can add inputs to and the demand planning inventory team. It's not a data warehouse. You can do this in a Google Sheets. It doesn't have to be that complicated, but it's just updated daily based on what's coming up, sales that are coming up, all that kind of stuff. Another very important process that we did is, before POs are submitted by the demand planning team, the marketing team signs off on them. So they make sure, okay, this looks about right. This is 3 weeks of coverage. It makes sense. But also, even before the demand planning team looks for a sign off, they get the inputs necessary. So they go to the marketing team. That's where we have the weekly meetings between both teams that are mandatory, to get ideas on what things are needed, what things are coming up, what's going on. Are we phasing out a certain SKU and putting something else in its spot? How do we phase it out appropriately? Getting that input back and forth. And then once we receive the input, the sales that we're running, all that kind of stuff, the demand planning team runs an analysis. They come up with suggested POs. And then based on those suggested POs, the marketing team then approves them. Okay, this looks right. It's aligned with what we have. But the overall premise is that both teams are very, very much aligned and very much talking to each other, because they're very much obviously related and rely on each other for success. And this is actually a conversation that goes both ways, because the demand planning team also has to approve any upcoming sales to make sure we have enough inventory for them. Or on the other hand, if we do have too much inventory, they make requests to the marketing team, because it's overstock, to liquidate that inventory, to run a more aggressive sale. So again, it's a two-way conversation between both teams. The next part of this is related to 5 specific inputs that we measure to come up with more accurate forecasting. And I have them written down here, and I took this exactly from our system, so I just literally printed it. But I'll read them off. So the first one is making sure that we're looking at velocity at various windows. So we're not just looking at the last 30 days, we're looking at the last 60 days, the last 90 days, that same period last year. So let's say I'm in March, right? I'm not only looking at March's, whatever happened in March, I'm also looking at February, I'm also looking at January, but I'm also looking at April of last year. And then April, May of last year as well, and seeing what that looks like. So looking at those various windows. And one mistake that we've had with the brand is they only looked at the past 30 days. And the issue is that doesn't give you enough context. There's a lot of chances where velocity, some random event happened, your competitor went out of stock for a few days. So having a more truncated window, or a larger window, can allow larger variance on that instance. The second one is seasonality. So this is where, obviously, if there's a Prime Day, that's a discount coming up. But if you have a Q4 item, one item, for example, right, is the partner, they didn't know they had a Father's Day uptick. And because of that, they didn't look at last year's sale. They had a suggested PO. It was actually going to undersell by around 30 or 40%. So let's say the Father's Day, they would run out of stock for approximately 20 or 30 days because of the uptick there. We looked at seasonality of last year and we looked at the season was coming up. So we increased our PO by 20 to 30% to account for that variance to make sure we don't run out of stock. Because as I said, again, obviously running out of stock is a huge, especially at that point, because the competitor was adding features that we had and they were eating market share. So I can only imagine running out of stock during then would have really gave them a huge boost. So that's the second thing you have to take into account, seasonality. The third thing is obviously promotional lift, whether it's for a certain event, tentpole events, a Prime Day, etc., or just running a best deal or lightning deal. Obviously, those have to be taken into account into your forecast. And then the fourth one is competitor activity. So new variants coming in, did a competitor, are they reducing their price? That's going to impact your velocity, right? So looking at the overall landscape. Some of these, again, we're not looking, every time we place a PO, we're not looking at the competitor landscape. That's probably a quarterly outlook. But it's still something that we look at once we're placing POs, and we're still looking at the landscape. And then last, but definitely not least, actually, this is probably the most important one, is lead time. And this is where it becomes really tricky because you can also somewhat control this. So I'll just give an example. As we were running lead time for an item overseas. So lead time is basically just the time it takes from when you place the PO, let's just say until it arrives at Amazon, becomes Prime eligible. We'll just give it that definition. So how long is that distance to get items in stock once you place a PO, right? And there's variances, right? You have domestic is going to be much shorter because in the US, international, China is much longer. Backlogs, if it's seasonality, just with Amazon, for example, you have Q4, a lead time doubles almost, just that specific portion of it, because checking into Amazon usually takes, let's say, a week and a half. During that period, it takes 3.5 weeks, right? At Prime Day, something similar. So understanding lead time and understanding the volatility of lead time is truly something that's very important. It fluctuates also. There is some consistency, but there's some variables in there, like check-in time to Amazon, shipping on boat. But also one example where we're able to alter this is we had an item tick up very quickly. This is where we ship the products, instead of shipping them by boat, we ship them by air. It costs much more, but we didn't want to run out of stock. We shrunk the lead time by, I think it was around 80 days initially to around 50 days. And that wasn't enough of a gap to stay in stock, but it costs more because that's why getting the lead time right, make sure that you can control costs. You can also RFP, like if we go our lead time very conservatively, so we give a few extra days, because that gives us a few days to RFP different vendors. If our vendor for shipping came in with a larger price, we can go to someone else. We have some leeway there. And if our sales uptick a bit, which we're usually growing the brands, right, then we have some time to jump in there with more inventory before it runs out of stock fully. So lead time is very crucial. Where it becomes very, very, very tricky, and this is one we struggled honestly with, and that's I remember mentioning that we're 98.7% in stock. The 1.3% out of stock, almost 90% of the time it comes from new entrants, first to markets. We're releasing a new product. It's very tough to measure velocity for those items. Sometimes a few items, they just blow up as soon as they hit Amazon and we run out of stock. And that's where we have to be more aggressive into softer variables, having a safety stock, not at Amazon because it costs more. That's some of the stuff we started doing. Safety stock is one of them. Another one is, for example, lowering marketing spend, getting a feel, checking it instantly almost every hour instead of every day, for example. So much more things where we're much more sensitive to newer entrants because it's harder to get a pulse. We check competitors at market, all that kind of stuff to try to hone that in and get it more accurate. The third part of our process is the reorder math that we use. So how often do we order? And a big mistake I see brands is they look at the reorders at a periodic period. So one brand that we partnered with, they used to look at their brands every Monday, first Monday of every month. What does that look like? And never mind the fact that it's a long period, but the bigger problem is that it's not continuous and it's not within a system, it's not automated. And what happened was there was a gradual rise, not enough to be noticed, almost 5%, but the 5% was gradual day over day. And by the time Monday came, they, based on their lead time, was like 80, 90 days, they were projected to run out of stock for a month. We put in, that's mentioned the air example. That's where we put it in also in here, but it costs so much money and we want to avoid that. So gradual rises and making sure that you're consistently checking. So we have a daily cadence. We also have inventory alerts and software. So we have an ERP, we have our data warehouse. So if you don't have those yet, you can even set up alerts within Google Sheets, whatever, or even just check them manually every day to make sure that your safety level stock, there's some stuff there, you have enough inventory projected to outlast what you're going to run out of inventory. So that's a very, very important trigger. And also in the same hand, overstocking, like just continuously having the same reorder 1,000. So that's the same thing as like slight trends downwards. So let's say on the other hand, instead of gradually going up, let's say 5% a day, you go down 5% a day. The just automatic reorder, you're piling up more and more inventory because your trajectory is going downwards. So making sure you're consistently checking, but also consistently measuring against the baseline. You're incorporating the 5 factors we mentioned from earlier. All that kind of stuff are implementing in the reorder trigger. So the way that we do it, and again, I'm going to take this exactly from our system, is that we have a floor trigger the reorder when 100 days of cover hits. So our goal is 100 days of cover. I'm going to jump into KPIs at the end. And this handles making sure that when that comes there, we have a trigger, we have an email alert or a ClickUp alert, and we go check it out. And then we also have on the other hand a ceiling trigger. If we have over 100 days of stock, we also have an alert then, or sorry, over 150 days of stock, because we want to be in that range. We want to be from between ideally 80 to 150, and the sweet spot is 100 is where we like to be at. It's a little bit over, but again, we're usually growing the brand, so we want to make sure we're on the safer side. And then a breakout flag fires immediately when the forecast is 24 hours. We're going to miss that window. So we want to make sure that we have that there. And then we have pre-approved triggers. So sometimes there's automatic cadence. If there's a larger order, we have to escalate it to leadership. But otherwise, there's certain ranges that are allowed for certain items within the ERP, and those get automatically approved to go through without having to go through it. So the general is we have weekly reviews checking the overall concept of it. We have quarterly reviews checking certain stuff. And then we have instant ones checking new entrants. So again, different cadences or different check-in periods depending on the type of item. And that's something you have to incorporate based on the sensitivity, the data you have. If you have an item that's been in stock 6-7 years, we're not changing anything, then a weekly reorder point is fine for that. But then if we have something that we're running promotions on, we're testing new packaging, competitors are going in and out, then we have a more closer check-in period for the item. The fourth part of our system is addressing real-world constraints. And this is actually the most interesting one because this is where we kind of were in La La Land or Utopia, like everything is perfect, but we have to hit real world now. And there's a few constraints that we constantly run into. I'm going to mention the most common 4. The first one is obviously MOQ. Mentioning a new entrant, you have to work with vendors that are working with you. We usually tell them this is a test. We have to negotiate with them. There's a nice book that I like about negotiating. I mentioned this before in one of the other videos, but basically it's written by Chris Voss. He's an FBI director, and he talks about how he negotiated. But again, using negotiating tactics on getting the MOQ that you need, telling them it's a test, paying a little bit more. I'd rather pay a little bit more per unit than buy a lot of units because then I don't have working capital tied up, but I'm also not paying FBA storage. The second one is container and shipping efficiency. So again, let's say you want to order 30 or 50 units. That's all you need. But there's so much cost expenses related to shipping the item is you ideally want to always fill up the box. Like let's say there's 30 items in a box. So you want to fill up all the boxes, but you also want to fill up the container. So let's say you need 290 units, but 30 items fit in a box. You want to add 2 units into the last box to get the extra efficiency. Let's say 30 boxes fill into a container. So measuring the push and pull between shipping efficiency and the MOQ or reorder point needed and finding that balance is truly when we need a surgeon to kind of come in on the PO and try to get those numbers right to get that full container. Because if we have extra space, we're paying for a container either way. Let's try to add a few more units. Again, we're not going to force it because we're going to end up paying way more downstream with excess shipping, all that kind of stuff. But we try to fit that in there. And let's say we're at a container, there's a little bit more units that are going to fill it up. All right, it's not worth the headaches. Let's see what we can take out, and we'll just make the other reorder faster. So that's another one that we take into account. The third one is obviously cash flow. If there's certain demand planning periods coming in, the vendor payment terms, that's sometimes a constraint where we have to make the reorder a little bit smaller to address the current cash flow, to support our partners, and then reorder another period right after that. And the fourth and hardest one to tackle is FBA IPI inventory performance, or more importantly, the FBA capacity limits. Thankfully, we've been able to tackle this very well. I made a video on this in the past where we ran into Prime Day of last year and we were able to bid for extra units. But again, if there's no size or capacity there, then there's nothing that can be done, and we're just going to be stuck with inventory that we can't ship at the FB. So making sure that that's checked off, we check our capacity limits, we're being efficient with inventory so we can, again, get that shipping space. The fifth part of our process is measuring KPIs or metrics very accurately. There's 4 pillar KPIs that we stick to. And I'll also mention the KPI along with our benchmark. So the first one is forecast accuracy. So how accurate was our forecast, the days of stock, all that kind of stuff compared to the actual. This is where we rely on the financial planning team to make sure they're putting in accurate forecast. We like to be around 90%. That's where we've been challenging ourselves. So we're usually at 80%, getting more accurate, adding more variables, adding more data as mentioned earlier, and adding even the cost within this, like the shipping cost that I mentioned earlier, trying to get that forecast accurate on the shipping cost per pound, dealing with thin margins. And that's where we see a lot of brands actually lose money that I mentioned earlier. The second part of this, and that's one of the leading indicators, another leading indicator is days of stock. So how many days of stock do we have? That makes sure that we're not going to pay too much in excess inventory. Again, our goal is to be at 100. We don't want to be more than 100. More than that means we're paying too much in storage. Less than that means we might be running out of risk to run out of stock. The third one is one of the most important ones, obviously in stock rate. We want to be at 90, 99% in stock rate. We want to run out of stock as few times as possible. Again, we want to be at 100%, right? But we have to also be realistic, because then we're just going to have too much stock and overorder everything. And also there's human errors. There's a lot of things that honestly happen. So that's on a lagging side. And then another lagging indicator is FBA storage fees. So the FBA storage fees, you want to reduce as much as possible. They're extremely expensive. There's inventory age surcharge fees. There's Q4 storage fees where they triple. So you want to make this as little as possible, because it also helps with other stuff. Because if our storage fees are little compared to our sales, obviously, then our capacity limits are going to be healthy, because Amazon knows we store products efficiently. But also, most importantly, is you want to make sure we have counter metrics for the team. So if you notice these stocks, just as an example, days of cover is the opposite of in-stock rate, because days of cover, the goal is to be as little as possible, as little inventory as possible, because we don't want to pay storage. But if we have too little inventory, we're going to run out of stock. And in-stock rate, we want it to be as high as possible. We want it to be 100%, but if we just manage for 100%, then our days of inventory is going to be a lot. So that's actually one of the very important concepts that we keep in mind as we're running inventory situations and our KPIs. If you like this video, turn on your subscriptions, turn on the notifications so you can continue getting more of these. And also, come check us out at Voadera.com, see if we can help you grow your Amazon sales, and check out this video on Amazon profit margin.